Ohio has produced more U.S. presidents than almost any other state, but one of them pulled off something incredibly rare. He defeated the sitting president. He was the grandson of another president, and his presidency helped begin the federal government's first real fight against powerful corporate monopolies. Yet today, many Americans barely remember his name. Today, we are talking about Benjamin Harrison, the fifth president from Ohio. And if you enjoy stories about American history and the presidents who came from the Buckeye State, make sure to subscribe because in this series, we're telling the stories of all 8 presidents from Ohio. One of the things I really enjoyed while making this series is the chance to visit one of the president's homes here in Ohio. When I did the episode on James A. Garfield, I had a chance to visit his house and spend time walking around the property where he lived and worked. And when you visit one of these presidential sites, you realize they tell so many more details about their lives than you could ever fit into a 10-minute YouTube video. But today, we are going to take a closer look at the life of Benjamin Harrison and how he became the fifth president from Ohio. Benjamin Harrison was born in 1833 in a small river town of North Bend located along the Ohio River. And if that town sounds familiar, there's a good reason. His grandfather was William Henry Henderson, the hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe, and later the president who served the shortest term in American history. If you've been following the series, that story might sound familiar because William Henry Harrison was actually the first episode in the Presidents from Ohio series. So Benjamin Harrison grew up surrounded by stories of politics, military leadership, and the presidency itself. But despite the famous last name, his life wasn't simply handed to him. His family believed strongly in discipline and education. Harrison attended Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, graduated in 1852. After finishing school, he studied law and moved west to Indianapolis, where he began building his career as an attorney. At the time, Indianapolis was expanding rapidly as railroads spread across the Midwest. Harrison developed a reputation as a serious and hard-working lawyer who believed strongly in doing things the right way. But just as his career was beginning to take shape, the country was about to be pulled into one of the most devastating conflicts in American history. In 1861, the American Civil War began. Like many men of his generation, Harrison stepped forward to serve. He helped organize the 70th Indiana Infantry Regiment, and before long he became its colonel. Harrison wasn't known as a loud or dramatic commander. In fact, many people described him as quiet and reserved, but the soldiers under him respected his calm leadership. During the Battle of Reseca in 1864, Harrison and his regiment fought an intense combat against Confederate forces. His leadership impressed his superiors, and by the end of the war, he had been promoted to brigadier general. Years later, veterans who served under him often said Harrison was the kind of officer who looked out for his men and stayed calm under pressure, and that reputation would follow him into politics. After the war, Harrison returned to Indianapolis and resumed practicing law, but he was no longer just a lawyer. He was a Civil War general, and in the late 1800s, that carried a great deal of influence in American politics. He became active in the Republican Party, the same party that had risen to prominence under Abraham Lincoln. In 1881, Harrison was elected to the United States Senate representing Indiana. While serving in the Senate, he supported civil rights protections and worked to secure pensions for Civil War veterans. But the biggest political moment of his life was still ahead. Before we get to the election that made Benjamin Harrison president, if you've been enjoying these stories about the presidents from Ohio, this is a great time to subscribe to the channel. Ohio has produced 8 presidents, and every one of them has a fascinating story behind how they reached the White House. All right, back to the story. In 1888, the Republican Party nominated Benjamin Harrison for president. His opponent was the sitting president, Grover Cleveland, and the election that followed became one of the most unusual in American history. When the votes were counted, Cleveland actually won the popular vote. More Americans had voted for him, but Harrison won the Electoral College, which is what ultimately determines the presidency. So even though Cleveland had more total votes nationwide, Benjamin Harrison won the election and became the 23rd president of the United States. Benjamin Harrison took office in 1889, and his presidency turned out to be surprisingly active. One of the most important laws passed during his administration was the Sherman Antitrust Act. At the time, giant corporations were beginning to dominate industries like railroad, steel, and oil. The Sherman Antitrust Act was designed to limit monopolies and prevent companies from controlling entire markets. It became the first major federal law aimed at regulating big business, and it would eventually shape American economic policies for decades. Harrison also worked on strengthening and modernizing the U.S. Navy, but one of his most lasting legacies involved protecting the country's natural landscapes. During his presidency, Harrison helped preserve more than 13 million acres of land. He signed legislation to help create national parks, including Yosemite National Park, Sequoia National Park. There's also a funny little story from Harrison's time in the White House. During his presidency, electricity was installed in the White House for the first time. But electricity was still brand new technology in the late 1800s, and apparently Harrison and his wife were a little nervous about it. So they were worried they might get shocked by the switches. So instead of turning lights on and off themselves, they sometimes asked the White House staff to do it. It's funny to think about today, considering how normal electricity feels now. In 1892, Harrison ran for president again, and once again he faced Grover Cleveland, but this time Cleveland won. The victory made Cleveland one of only 2 presidents in American history to serve non-consecutive terms. The other is our current president, Donald Trump. So Benjamin Harrison ended up serving just 1 term as president before Cleveland returned to the White House. After leaving office, Harrison returned to Indianapolis and resumed practicing law. Even as a former president, he remained active in public life and occasionally argued cases before the Supreme Court of the United States. He passed away in 1901 at the age of 67. His home in Indianapolis is preserved as the Benjamin Harrison Presidential Site, where visitors can learn more about the life of America's 23rd president. Benjamin Harrison might not always be the first name people remember when they think about American presidents, but his story connects several important moments in American history: the Civil War, the rise of industrial America, and the early fight against powerful monopolies. And he's also another reminder of something remarkable. Ohio produced 8 presidents of the United States, more than almost any other state. And in this series, we're telling the story of every one of them. But later in the series, we're also going to explore something fascinating: why one single state produced so many presidents in the first place. Because the story behind that is actually one of the most interesting political stories in American history. So if you enjoy these deep dives into history, make sure to subscribe. And I'll see you in the next episode as we continue the series on the presidents from Ohio. Thank you for watching.